Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Hey everyone, and welcome. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. This is Drew hanging out with you today. Got a bunch of fun stuff we're going to talk about today. First, I want to open with a new DC animated film. We've talked a bit before about how DC is really kind of crushing it with these animated movies that they have coming out. Now, one that they had just released was the Batman the Killing Joke, which is based off what they want to keep calling graphic novel. Honestly, for comic readers, it was just a one-shot, just a little bit bigger than a standard comic book. So not a graphic novel. It was a comic book. It was a one-shot. So they released it as a Fathom event. Fathom events basically, I believe, run through Cinemark, where they're not, studio movies. They do a lot of orchestra presentations. They also do those Fathom events where they'll show you like 6 classic movies and stuff like that. I went to go see Ghostbusters in theater not too long ago as a Fathom event, but other than that, I hadn't really been to one. This was the first DC animated movie that was ever going to be in theaters. In fact, it was in select theaters. It had gotten sold out where it was, so they added more theaters, and then it was doing so well in the theaters that it got added to that they added another night. So it was supposed to be a one-night event, got moved to 2. So that's how much steam was behind not only this film, but fan support of it. And Batman the Killing Joke, a highly revered story in the Batman mythos as written by Alan Moore. I am first going to preface this by saying I don't think that The Killing Joke, the book, was even all as wonderful as people want to make it out to be. I know a lot of people hold Alan Moore as this unrequited genius, and to a good extent, he writes pathological, cold, emotionless characters great. So if you want emotion, then just walk past everything that Alan Moore has ever written. Everything he does, because Alan Moore himself is a very pathological, very logical, very precise and succinct person. Yes, the way his mind works is, people will look at it because basically people are emotional beings, and so they see someone like Alan Moore and they think like, oh wow, what a genius. But he's and that's really, if you go and you look at The Watchmen, the best characters in there being Rorschach, being Dr. Manhattan, pathological, on a mission, very cold characters. And the people that are emotional, like, even the comedian had a bit of, in his psychosis, him and his emotional character was kind of a bad guy, and emotional characters are just kind of fools in his story, in the stories that he makes. So that's what makes him such a good Batman character writer and you're going to see in this movie, because they basically put everything that was in The Killing Joke, because it was a short read. Batman he's practically robotic. He's methodical, pathological. I'm going to go into it further, but I just want to say on the onset, I enjoy The Killing Joke. I don't think it's the greatest Batman story ever written. I do not accept that Joker origin, and really, if you look at Joker's origin, not Joker in the present tense where he's doing all this crazy, insane stuff to Barbara and Jim Gordon. I'm just talking about his origin, completely flat. His character made no sense because his character was emotional, and when you look at the drawing between why it is, he goes in, he's a failure at his job, his wife is pregnant. And so he somehow gets in communique with these gangsters, and he decides he's just going to be part of a heist. I don't know why he thinks he would be capable of doing such a thing, but clearly he was desperate, so that's why he's doing it. He just doesn't want to be a fool. And then the night of, they're about to go do whatever they're going to do, he gets word that his wife had died and the kid had died in an accident. Sorry, spoiler alert for those seeing the movie, but the book's been out for, 30 years. So, instead of him breaking down and running away, he just walks back into the bar, tells these guys what happened to his family, and that was supposed to be an emotional moment, but Alan Moore just kind of skips it because Alan Moore he's a cyborg. He has no real human emotion. So the way he writes is like, what would possibly be a circumstance where he would need to be pushed further, and he just sort of like, oh yeah, well, people dying makes people feel bad. I'm just gonna put this in, and it's completely flat, but. When he is the Joker, his Joker is so philosophical and pointed, and everything he says is like this sing-songy, clearly been on Alan Moore's mind when the Joker talks about insanity. So everything that happened in the Killing Joke stories in this movie. Now, I want to tell you it is the Killing Joke, but you will be confused for the first 35 minutes because the Killing Joke was so short, they had to create more to make the movie feature length. And it was billed as it's the first DC movie that's rated R, animated movie that's rated R, and we're putting it in theaters, and it's the Killing Joke. It's this most beloved story in comicdom, and then you start out the movie and there's a whole it's basically two separate movies. There's this whole thing involving Batgirl, which is the first 35 minutes of the movie, and I had to explain to the friend I went to go see this with, Batgirl in the Killing Joke, or Barbara Gordon as herself, she's only in it for 4 frames. She's literally in it for when the Joker shows up and shoots her. That is it. That's all she's in the thing for. But this whole entire opening of the movie is its own story. It's its own movie. Brian Azzarello, they brought him in. He's worked with Frank Miller. He's really was probably the best guy for the job to kind of create something to link to. He really wrote, all this first half stuff with Barbara, with Batgirl and Batman was all him. And then after that had a clear ending, and they tried to patch it together with, I told you that to tell you this, and then it goes into the actual Killing Joke story. So you don't even see the Joker until about 40 minutes into the movie, I want to say, 40, and then, really it's all him. But, he comes in halfway through. So you have to wait to see the actual adaptation of the Killing Joke on screen. And everything in there, it's what's in the book. So when anybody says I enjoyed the book more, well, everything that was in the book was in the movie. So I don't know what you're talking about. So even in that, they had to pad a little bit of it because Batman's going around and he's having to question people and find out where the Joker is. And it is Kevin Conroy. He returns as Batman. It's a different kind of performance in this. He's not as deep tone. He sounds a little bit more human, a little bit more airy, a little bit lighter in this one. But everything he says is succinct, and it is borderline scary because of how almost emotionless he is. He's intense, he's intelligent, and he's cold. And there's not a wasted word of Batman dialogue in the entirety of the movie, not even just the part they made up. But that's how Brian Azzarello works. When Brian Azzarello, who wrote the Joker One Shot or Lex Luthor Man of Steel, and a lot of these books that have Batman in it, although he's not the main guy, he pares down and whittles down Batman's voice into having the most impact in the fewest amount of words possible. And that's what makes him one of the better Batman writers out there. And it's all over in this movie. And he was great. Mark Hamill returns as the Joker. You can hear the age a bit in his voice, but it's still, nothing is lost. Still a great performer. And it was needed for this type of character, for this Joker that they had in it, who's very sadistic, and even more sadistic by just his attitude towards the awful thing that he does. But like I said, one of the more philosophical Joker. You won't be seeing this on like Justice League Unlimited or anything like that, where he's more, kind of clownish than he is maniac. And this one is all over maniac Joker. And people who, like, obviously people who didn't read the book, when they complain about the ending, it still has the ambiguity that the original book had. And it was fun to watch. Go see it. It's rated R, obviously, for some of the themes that happens in it and some of the occurrences. But as far as like, there's not a bunch of F-bombs and there's not a bunch of bloody violence. It's just really the themes of the movie dictated that as such. So go out and see it. You may not be able to catch it in theater, but it is available to buy or rent. So you can check that out. Batman, The Killing Joke. All right, that concludes this first segment of the show, where I'm going to be right back. I'm going to talk to you a bit about some upcoming Star Wars stuff. So stick around. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we are back to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Now, one of the things you might be familiar with here, now that the mouse owns Star Wars, the first thing they wanted to do was obviously jump to making the next set of a trilogy, the ones that take place within the current time frame, not the current time frame, but the current storytelling that was 4, 5, and 6, and the prequels of 1, 2, and 3, the awful George Lucas Jar Jar Binks series. The first thing they wanted to do was make the episode 8 to continue that on. Great idea. Okay. Or sorry, episode 7. Sorry, they're making episode 8. So the Adventures of Luke Skywalker continue, now with Rey and Finn. So that was the first thing they wanted to do. And then in typical Disney fashion, the next thing they want to do is, where are the spin-off opportunities? There's obviously a bunch of great and lovable characters from the series. How can we make more money off of that? Now, interestingly enough, and I think one of the best things, I don't know who's running stuff over there, or whoever brought this in. Maybe they just have Marvel running the entire show, but the next thing they did, they made announcements that they wanted to make solo spin-off movies of Han Solo. I think they mentioned Boba Fett and then Yoda. But as far as actual production went, they made this next movie. So they made episode 7, which takes place after the events of Return of the Jedi. And then the next movie they decided to go into was Rogue One, which very interesting to me, because obviously a script like that had to be floating around, if not at Lucasfilm, in Disney itself, because that one they moved on fairly quickly. And they had started making Rogue One, which takes place between episode 3 and episode 4. I mean, it takes place before A New Hope, or kind of concurrently. Well, it would have to be before, because this is how they got the stolen Death Star plans. But an idea like that and then a script that they approved for production, that had to be around for quite a while. If not, when they first announced this whole thing, somebody came in and suggested and put that in the ear of wanting to make this particular story. And obviously, they're not going to have it be without its link. It's not, I'm telling you, Rogue One is not just going to link the events of A New Hope. It's not just going to show you, like, this is how these people got this thing. There are going to be characters or something that happens in this story that are going to come back and relate to the events that are unfolding here with Rey and Finn and Luke 30 years down the road. I'm telling you, something's going to be in there. I don't think this is just a one-off separated thing, but one thing it does do is, since it goes back in time, it allows you to see the old school stormtroopers, and you're going to see Darth Vader. I'm very excited for Rogue One. I think it's going to be fantastic. But after they did that, now they wanted to move on to obviously continuing the regular episodes and then making their spin-off flicks. Now, I'm glad they put Boba Fett and Yoda on the shelf. I do not want to see a young Yoda movie because he's a perfect character and heroes are supposed to be imperfect. I don't want to see that. Boba Fett, I think he works as saying as little as possible and having that air of mystery. If you make him the primary guy, he can't just go the whole movie with his mask on. I mean, they did it in Dredd, but look how that worked out. I mean, I love Dredd, but soft-spoken guy who has to carry the film, but he's also a bounty hunter, and you have to be the protagonist. Therefore, it has to be somewhat of heroic qualities. It can't just be about a bad guy doing bad things. So, which by the way, Jason Aaron, this is in the comic realm, he took over and he was writing a Star Wars series that takes place between episodes 4 and 5, and they have Boba Fett in it, and it is fantastic. If you haven't read that, I would highly recommend picking it up. But one thing they have affirmed to is making a Han Solo spinoff. Obviously, a character, some people are going to complain, only serves best in that kind of ensemble, but gives you the most and best opportunity to make another series of films, and it's going to be young Han Solo. Now, there was a series of books that were about Han Solo with him and talking about the origins of his relationship with Chewbacca, how he manages to win the Millennium Falcon away from Lando, like a bunch of stuff like that, and really how he had the falling out with Jabba the Hutt, where that series ends where he's now sitting in Mos Eisley and about to talk to Obi-Wan and Luke. I don't know if they're going to do those particular books, because obviously Disney's wanting to do their own thing, as you clearly saw in episode 7. They may borrow from it from a little bit, but one of the things, because they're wanting to make more than one film, they've already cast Han Solo himself. His name is Alden Ehrenreich. He's not from around these parts. But this is what they had to say about as far as making Han Solo have his own film and making it like prequel stories. They said that, quote, there is a real sense of excitement around the Han Solo movie and its potential. Given that Han's early adventures do not need to be tied to the Empire, it leaves storylines open with the opportunity to really give fans something different. They can explore new galaxies and crazy creatures and bring a wide array of characters. So they've gotten some folks who were involved in the older Star Wars films. I believe the guys that did... the guys, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who were behind the Lego movie, they're the ones that are directing this new one. Now, that said, I know a lot of his adventures, as far as being a smuggler and pirate, are not tied with the Empire. However, his relationship with Chewie, again, and if you go off of that pre-established characterization, and we even see it in Han Solo himself in the movies. He's wearing, and this is what my fellow geeks and nerds will find out, his pants, that stripe in his pants is not just a fashion choice. It shows that he once attended the Imperial Academy. Now, in the story, those other books that came out, he did attend the Imperial Academy, but this new series, you can easily explain it away that he just stole the pants off somebody that he pirated. So they can go in and they can they can do whatever they want. They have carte blanche over the whole thing. They don't have to hold true to any other book that had come out. But if they do decide to do that and they show a little bit of his background of him having gone to the Imperial Academy and then him getting away from it, and really sort of that Firefly, Malcolm Reynolds type attitude of getting away from that particular governmental force. I don't know what they're going to do, but obviously I think they want to make 2, if not 3 of these movies, and I hope that they end with that exact situation, that really in the 3rd movie they end it where he's walking into Mos Eisley and then he's approached, by Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then it just kind of takes it from there. But they're really wanting to make this its own, and yeah, there's going to be opportunity. It's the ability that the scope that Han can bring, not only with his dealings with Boba Fett, but the piracy and the smuggling lends itself to a lot of adventure story, and ones where they may cross paths with the Empire every now and then, but it's not a necessity. So I don't think you're going to be seeing a lot of lightsabers, a lot of Force talk when it comes to these new Han Solo flicks. You're just going to see the Millennium Falcon, and you're going to see blasters, and you're going to see Chewbacca, and you're going to see, his dealings with these people and how he gets in and out of these scrapes. So here's hoping that they really maintain true to that character. I don't want to see him become, slick talking, wisecracking guy. I just want to see him be that way the whole time. So we'll see how this turns out. The kid they got, I know they were really trying to find similarities, not just appearance-wise, but, maybe tonally-wise with Harrison Ford. And we'll see how this kid does. I think the best part about this is they're really getting people that love Star Wars and love the characters to make the film. So I'm glad that they have people that are familiar with it and people that love it and want to take care of it, rather than just somebody who's like, yeah, I kind of familiar with this, and I have a history of making successful films, although I want to do what I want to do, and that's how you get the Joel Schumacher Batman flicks. So I think they're very particular about who they try to go through. And luckily, most people working in the action, adventure, science fiction game today, most of the people are Star Wars fans. So they're more than happy to try to do something, take a lot of ideas that they had or friends of theirs had and talked about, and flesh something out. So Han Solo movies coming down the pipe. And that's the end of this second segment. We're going to come back with a little bit of news, a little bit of fantasy, but hey, I want to call it science fiction, fantasy, whatever. It's my show. So we're going to talk about that. This is Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, everybody, we are back. It's Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Now, I talked to you about on another show about the differences between sci-fi and horror, and I said if you take the brain out of a horror movie, or if you take a brain out of a science fiction movie, you would have a horror film. And similar with how fantasy goes, if you take explanation out of science fiction, then you have fantasy. And those are really the only things that that separate the two. So when you talk about the world of science fiction and you talk about fantasy involving magic, sci-fi usually attempts to explain how things are. If you just take that explanation and just say, this is something that exists and here are the rules, although they never explain to you how it came about or where it came from, then you have fantasy. And one thing that's coming out, and I really didn't know about this until just recently, was the makings of a new King Arthur film. Now, when you talk about franchises and story franchises and film franchises, there are those that are franchises that are of a brand that have many stories to them, that have sequels, that have a through line, stuff like Back to the Future, stuff like Star Wars, Star Trek, those particular types. And then there are franchises where the story of it is so classic, and then they just keep redoing that same story. In film, Three Musketeers is one of those. There's a bunch of different versions of the Three Musketeers, but they're all iterations of kind of the same story. Now, they did make The Man of the Iron Mask, which was somewhat enjoyable there, as a sequel to that, but they've done the Three Musketeers a lot. And King Arthur is another one of those things. We've seen film versions of it. We've seen cartoon versions of it. We've seen, I believe it was on, was it Showtime or Stars that did that short-lived series with the rat boy-looking kid that was King Arthur. So we just recently, Anton Fuqua did one with Clive Owen. So it's one of those franchises that they'll go in and they can tell a different kind of story with it, but they have to have those elements, the sword and the stone, Merlin, Lancelot, Galahad, Marion, like all of those characters are in it, and they have to develop him becoming a king. And it's a world that a lot of people like to get into and inhabit, and make that happen. And now we get Guy Ritchie's chance. And Guy Ritchie just recently, well, I don't know about recently is pretty subjective, but when you look at his work on the Sherlock Holmes films, seeing him move from the gangster flick of Snatch or Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Rock and Rolla, those movies, and then he went into Revolver, which was kind of a heady, not necessarily an action movie, but then he got Sherlock Holmes, and the scope was bigger. And now he was having to make a movie that was a period piece. It had to have action elements. It had to have an intelligence, which he's incredibly intelligent. Guy Ritchie's an insanely smart dude. But he had to make a different kind of film. And he did a lot of things that were new, with like the fight recall and using slow motion to that effect, and the breakdown, and basically having to broaden his palette and broaden his the visual limits that he went to, but still using the same type of editing tricks that he had been known for before. And now he's taking on King Arthur. And if you peep the trailer for this flick, I believe it's called King Arthur: Legend of the Sword. There's a lot going on with this, and it's not just the scope of battles, and which is inevitably going to happen in sword fighting, stuff like that, but there's huge, like, giant elephants and just a real air of more fantasy than the Anton Fuqua is going to be in. It's going to be this level of it's going to be like Snatch meets Lord of the Rings. Like, just take a look at it. Now, the trailer put together uses a lot of those editing tricks and like rewind and stuff like that. I don't know if that's how it's going to be in the actual film, but this is how the trailer is cut. And the film itself, we're talking star power. Charlie Hunnam plays King Arthur. He's of Sons of Anarchy fame. Aidan Gillen, who most notably as recently playing Peter Baelish, Littlefinger there on Game of Thrones. Eric Bana plays Uther Pendragon, so obviously he won't be very long for the film, mostly doing, probably flashes of his past, stuff like that. Jude Law, he plays the bad guy. He plays Vortigern. Demon Hansu, I hope that's how you say his name. Gladiator, who's in Guardians of the Galaxy. He plays Sir Bedivere, so they got, they're incorporating that. We'll see what his origins are in the flick. But hey, there's a black dude as a member of the Round Table. Hey, it's progress. And let's see who else. Going all the way through here. A lot of females in the cast. Not too bad. David Beckham's going to be in it. I'm trying to say this as best I possibly can. Camille Lemizewski, he plays Merlin, and you've seen him in stuff. He hasn't necessarily been, the main cat in a lot of movies, but he's playing Merlin. Let me take a look here. It doesn't appear that we're going to have, at least in the main listed cast, as far as characters like Galahad or Lancelot playing a part in this. It is another sort of origin type story for Arthur. It's going to be about building his legend. It looks like there's already sort of an overlord patriarchy that's going on, and obviously he's not a kid when he pulls the sword from the stone. He's actually an adult. We're going to find out really why he even takes a shot at doing it. But when it comes to description, Guy Ritchie and how they describe it and everything, this is just a description of the film. Quote, the young Arthur runs the back passages of Londinium with his crew, not knowing his royal lineage until he grabbed Excalibur. Instantly confronted by the sword's influence, Arthur is forced to make up his mind. He joins the rebellion and a shadowy young woman named Guinevere. He must learn to understand the magic weapon, deal with his demons, and unite the people to defeat the dictator Vortigern, the man who murdered his parents and stole his crown to become king. End quote. So it's going to show Uther as being that leader of the past. I imagine they get Arthur himself away from that. He grows up in the streets and manages to become, the leader of a resistance and become the king of the humanity. So it's a different telling of the same Arthur story. A lot of those iterations, even the sword and the stone. So it's going to be a sort of street level, maybe relatable type Arthur and his buddy Bedivere running through the streets and then finding their way up top, rags to riches, baby, type of story. And makes perfect sense for Guy Ritchie. So you can see that coming out. Looks like that's 2017. I imagine most of it's kind of done. They're just kind of waiting to get that released, but it will be coming out sometime, I'm assuming early next year. I don't know if it's going to be next summer. Let's see, March. Looks like it's going to get a March release date. So it'll be one of those tweeners that's kind of not quite the summer blockbuster time, but enough where there's not a whole lot going out in theaters action-wise. Will be able to dominate and make a bit of money there. So new King Arthur, yay! Looks pretty cool. I'm not hot on Charlie Hunnam, but he's okay. He's got enough people around him to make him good. Anyway, sorry, ladies. All right, that concludes today's show. I want to thank you all for hanging out here with me. You can check us out on gsmcpodcast.com, or you can check us out on iTunes or anywhere you can get a podcast subscription. Check out our other fine programs as well. Follow us on Facebook and or Twitter, whatever your chosen platform is. I have been Drew. You have been great. Thanks for hanging out. I'll talk to you later.